Hey, what's up, Johnny Depp fam? It's your boy, William of Ockham here, with my first foray into videos that, well, not my first, I did make one before, but this is my first expose, if you will, and I'm looking forward to discussing Michele Dauber. We're going to perform an examination of Michele Dauber, villainess. I'm pretty sure that most of you could agree she is a villainess. What with all of the ridiculous posts, particularly the van with red paint smeared on the side, says free candy, or any of those other posts. I mean, she's ridiculous. And so I decided to do this video first because of the current state of affairs with her and what's going on. I think it's important that we expose her for her involvement in all of this nonsense, considering she's deeply embedded in this whole web of greedy and frankly callous actors that are involved in the Depp versus Heard fiasco, the scandal, if you will. Anyhow, let's begin. I first want to lay the groundwork here by discussing the CIA's involvement, the U.S. intelligence community's involvement in recruiting from university campuses. I mean, this has been going on for a long time. I'll leave some links in the description below for you to check the receipts, just so that you can see exactly what I'm talking about. You can have the background, the source information that I got my perspectives from. So moving along here, let's take a look at Stanford's involvement with the CIA. This goes back quite a ways. We're talking about quite a ways, and particularly throughout the Cold War period, the CIA was using Stanford as a recruiting ground for what they would call the best and the brightest. It's been going on for quite some time. Obviously, there was some ethical questions about it that were raised, and then I also have some questions about whether or not it's just the CIA that's recruiting from university campuses. I wouldn't be surprised if Russia and China have been recruiting from there as well. That's an entirely different topic. I'd like to turn our attention, though, particularly towards the height of the Cold War, when U.S. military and intelligence reports in the 1970s claimed that the Soviet Union were investing a great deal of capital, money, time, and resources in researching ESP, telekinesis, and psionic abilities, and so forth. And the U.S. responded to that by funding its own top-secret research into these abilities. And this was headquartered at Stanford University. It was known as the Stargate Project. And it went on for quite some time, actually. It wasn't terminated until 1995. And it's strange that throughout this time as well is when Philip Zimbardo was conducted what's widely known as the Stanford Prison Experiment. So let's take a look at Zimbardo for a moment here. The Stanford Prison Experiment, as you can see, this is a plaque that's actually posted on Stanford campus. He performed this experiment funded by the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps. Excuse my typo there, Marines. And he performed this experiment, and for those of you who don't know, basically what was done is he recruited a number of students on campus to play either guards or prisoners, and he put together a mock prison and essentially tested how individuals would respond under these conditions. Within a few days, it was shut down because of the fact that it was considered highly traumatic. The strange part about it is all of these things were going on during a covert war against Nicaragua. It would make a lot of sense to consider how the CIA were actually in competition with corporate America to recruit what is known as the best and the brightest. And for Zimbardo to be performing these experiments at the same time that the CIA were engaging in their Stargate project makes it very clear, I think, my friends, that the CIA were deeply embedded in multiple university campuses and clearly deeply embedded in Stanford's campus. At the end of the Cold War, apparently the CIA purportedly, around 1993, purportedly shut down a lot of their recruitment centers and reassigned a number of their people that were originally there. However, they did continually return to Ivy League colleges like Stanford to search for potential recruits. And throughout this time, there were protests against the CIA's recruitment on campus, most particularly, or rather most markedly or remarkably. You can see here the image of a banner. In 1984, there was a pretty big protest that in essence turned the CIA away from campuses to a degree, if not only further pushed them into secrecy. That these recruitment processes were then clandestine. They were so deeply embedded by this point, it'd be ridiculous to assume that they had withdrawn completely. There's clearly a very strong, direct connection between the CIA, university campuses, and particularly to Stanford. So, having covered Stanford's connection and the intelligence connection, the connection of the intelligence community to Stanford, let's move along here and we'll take a look at, I think, what would be a very important consideration in Michele Dauber's connection to the Johnny Depp case. So let's take a look at her husband, Ken Dauber. Her husband, Ken Dauber, is a software engineer for Google. His research involves social behaviors and emergency situations and how computer models affect and are affected by crowd behaviors. Formally, he's listed as a software engineer. My intuition tells me that it's likely that he's probably involved in a lot more than simply software engineering. As a person and as a husband, here you can see him with his wife Michele. He's very passionate about the Palo Alto School Board. He's ran for trustee there numerous times. This is strange and frankly kind of creepy. You'll realize once we get a little bit deeper into how the Me Too movement has now begun encroaching on secondary schools or minors, much like radical feminism and gender ideology. So moving along, if we look at his connection to Google, there is absolutely no question that Google is tied to the CIA and the NSA. Originally, Google was actually founded off of CIA research grants. They started off of a $4.5 million multi-agency grant, meaning that there were a number of agencies that were involved in funding this. Two men, Sergey Brin and Larry Page, they invented the search service that would eventually become Google with this $4.5 million grant that was provided by the Digital Library Initiative. It's a program of the National Science Foundation, NASA, and the Pentagon's Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. Around 2003, the search engine customization processes came under special contract with the CIA. In 2005, it was revealed that a U.S. intelligence agency was working to leverage Google's users' data monitoring capability as part of an effort to acquire data of national security intelligence interest. Let's translate this for a second. So, in 2005, it was claimed, or the U.S. intelligence agency claimed, that they wanted to leverage Google's user data monitoring as a part of an effort to acquire data of national security intelligence interest. So this may sound similar to what you've all heard from Mr. Snowden, that there was this massive sweeping attempt to collect data on people all over the world, never mind just the United States. And it was around 2007 that they declared multi-agency access. So essentially it gave numerous different agencies access to this pipeline where all of Google's user data could be found and monitored, etc. In 2010, it was revealed that the NSA then had open access. This is fundamentally fucked, especially because it's directly related to the ACLU's campaign during the Freedom of Information, or the development of the Freedom of Information Act. Considering the freedom of information isn't about you, fellows, friends. It's not about your freedom to access information. It's about their freedom to gather information about you. In fact, 2012 was the time when NSA Chief General Keith Alexander, in an email, discussed information sharing for national security. In those emails, General Alexander described Google specifically as a key member, quote, key member of the U.S. military's defense industrial base, end quote. That is correct, my friends. The NSA chief identified Google as a component of the DoD. This was all in the name of fighting terrorism, quote unquote. The insanity. If you look below, there's in the description there is a link to an article on Medium.com about how the CIA made Google, and this is a quote from that article. This was also the year that the Bush administration drew up its notorious information operations roadmap, describing the internet as a, quote, vulnerable weapons system, end quote. Rumsfeld's I.O. roadmap had advocated that Pentagon strategy, quote, should be based on the premise that the Department of Defense will fight the net as it would an enemy weapons system, end quote. The U.S. should seek, quote, maximum control, end quote, of the full spectrum of globally emerging communications systems, sensors, and weapons systems. If this doesn't frighten you, I don't know what will. Because frankly, what this means is that the hegemon, the powers that be, if you will, had identified that capital, as you might understand it in terms of money or exchange of valuable resources. Pierre Bourdieu is famous for popularizing how capital takes myriad forms, and in this case, the emergence of the new capital was obvious. That the new capital was information. Check my typos. The Pentagno, it sounds like pasta. No less. The Pentagon, through this process, sought to dominate the world through the control over access to and dissemination of information. Now, that's right, dear friends. The Pentagon and the DoD, alongside Google, identified that information is the new capital and that their dominance over that capital would lead to world domination. Are you frightened yet? Well, let's tie Ken and Michele into this broader picture. I think that's what this video ought to be about. And how does that tie in? Well, let's begin with a look at what is widely known as the Weinstein effect and its social psychological ramifications. The Weinstein effect, to describe it to you friends, can be understood as a global trend in which allegations of sexual misconduct by famous or powerful men are disclosed. The first of a worldwide wave of allegations were made in the United States in October 2017, when media outlets reported on the sexual abuse allegations made against film producer Harvey Weinstein. And what happened out of this? Well, let's take a look. One of the first and most prominent, and I'll discuss these in reverse chronological order. So, one of the most prominent, rather, components of this radical feminist revolution was what's, or still known as, Time's Up. It's an organization founded by Tina Chen and Roberta Kaplan in 2018. And you might recognize the name Roberta Kaplan because she's Amber Heard's former attorney. And they developed Time's Up as a means of helping sexual abuse survivors, is what they essentially termed themselves. And they accepted donations, I believe it's in the range of $15 to $20 million in total. And frankly, we've yet to see where the fuck that money has gone to. But they developed this initiative, Time's Up, and the entire crew, unfortunately, ended up being exposed for a number of things. So, as far as the first real issue, it began. Let me just take a look here. Be patient with me. So yeah, they had raised over $20 million from donations, and it was during the Andrew Cuomo scandal that they the entire organization fell apart. It fell apart because the Time's Up crew were essentially found to have funded. Sorry, let me take a look here. So yeah, Roberta Kaplan resigned in 2021 after an investigative report describing the allegations that then New York Governor Andrew Cuomo had sexually harassed women, said she was involved in an effort to discredit former Cuomo aide Lindsey Boylan, the first of numerous women to accuse Cuomo of sexual misconduct. So Roberta Kaplan and the Time's Up crew were discrediting survivors who were stepping forward, actively discrediting survivors who stepped forward. So the Time's Up movement emerged out of what everybody knows as the Me Too movement. And everybody knows the hashtag Me Too, survivors stepping forward. It happened to me, it happened to you. I'm not downplaying at all the seriousness of sexual abuse survivor rhetoric. It's important. I'm a survivor. I'm more so downplaying how this entire thing was weaponized and mobilized to profit a select few billionaires. So Me Too traces back to 2006 on MySpace. A lady by the name of, what's her name again? Yeah, a lady by the name of Tarana Burke. Yes. She used the phrase first on MySpace back in 2006. Harvard University, they did a whole case study on her and the usefulness of Me Too rhetoric. And I do think that it's useful. I think it's very useful for all of us to bond together over similar traumatic experiences in order to minimize those traumatic experiences. But this is different. This rhetoric was popularized, which is good, but then it was hijacked. And it was, in fact, in around 2017 when Alyssa Milano started using it on Twitter, which sounded like, what she had said is, if all the women who have been sexually harassed or assaulted wrote Me Too as a status, we might give people a sense of the magnitude of the problem, is what she said. And not to mock Alyssa Milano, although she deserves it, but she popularized it, and a number of celebrities then began to step forward. There was terminations as well as a lot of criticism and backlash, and I'm part of that criticism and backlash here because as you can see here that I've stated quite clearly, Amber Heard is a product of this popularization of the Me Too as a hashtag as a social movement, and it created, or as Louis Althusser would call it, interpolated a subjectivity. It created Amber Heard, and this is why we need to be careful with rhetoric and discourse more generally. It has the power to create subjectivities. And that's why I then turn to a discussion of radical feminism. Why? Well, fourth wave radical feminism is a huge issue. It's a huge problem because internally its logics are incoherent. It's the fourth and fifth wave radical feminists claim sole authority, sole proprietorship over determining who's oppressed, who's the oppressor, and then also the sole authority over determining whether or not you belong to which group. And it's no longer about fighting for the rights of women. It's turned into an ideological tool. An ideological tool to control the way that people think about things, an ideological tool to control the way people talk about things, and internally it's inconsistent. And you can see this across the board, whether or not it's Charlotte Proudman talking about how the evidence doesn't matter, or gender ideologues when you ask them what is a woman, and the argument then becomes circular, well, a woman is a woman. This is all a result of fourth and fifth wave feminism that claims to be the single umbrella under which the oppressed can gather to fight against their oppressors. And it's all, frankly, just a giant load of bullshit. Feminism's useful when women's rights are being threatened, and it's useful in a number of different senses, a number of different ways, and I'll never dumb it down. But Ben Shapiro gives a great breakdown of the history of feminism. I'll leave the link downstairs in the description. However, I think I've adequately shown that it is not only a destructive force, but it's the destructive force behind the Me Too movement that produced Amber Heard and officially attempted to destroy our beloved Johnny Depp. So, as you can see, all of these threads are linked together through who? Well, through Michele Dauber. Let's take another look at Amber Heard and Evan Rachel Wood here as well, and how it's tied together with Miss Michele Dauber. So, how does it tie together? Well, the erasure of due process, which is nearly what happened to our beloved Johnny. Due process was nearly erased. I mean, we all know that the UK trial was a giant fucking joke. That wasn't due process. The evidence wasn't thoroughly examined. Amber wasn't thoroughly cross-examined properly. There's so many problems with it. I'm sure you can find a better legal breakdown of it than I could ever provide, because I'm no legal commentator. I am, however, a social and philosophical commentator, and that's what I'll address here. So the erasure of due process, in fact, we can trace that right back to Stanford and the Dear Colleague letter that went around. And what that is, the Dear Colleague discourse started in Stanford as a means of addressing sexual abuse allegations within the academic institution. And the Dear Colleague discourse basically is a way of conceptualizing and describing the way in which a woman in a position of power in academia became capable, and it was Stanford primarily, became capable of creating, or rather of avoiding due process simply through an allegation. So by making an allegation, the target of that allegation was instantaneously guilty. And it was Stanford that really started this ideological gear grinding that has bled out into the public. And it brings me right back to our beloved, or rather, I say that sarcastically, of course, but our favorite villainous English doctor, Miss Charlotte Proudman. She is obviously an example of this ideological gear grinding. We've all seen her statement that the evidence doesn't matter in this case, was her claim with respect to Johnny and Amber. She's another example of an ideological star trooper that's just blazing through the war theater, gunning down anybody that doesn't follow the narrative. And after the erasure of due process, well, the best next step is the interpolation of victim identity. What does that mean? Well, these processes have happened in tandem. So interpolation is a concept that was, I wouldn't say created, I'd say identified by a man named Louis Althusser. He's some call him a neo-Marxist. I don't. Marxism can be very toxic. He was a great philosophical thinker. He was filling in some blanks as to how our social systems work, and he was particularly interested in how ideas inform our social order, ideas and how they're communicated, ideas and how they're controlled. And he identified how ideas are actually also a form of a resource, and that there is a state apparatus that isn't just military, it isn't just intelligence, there's an ideological state apparatus, meaning a part of the state that their fundamental function is to control thought, and through that thought control process, by creating concepts or by imposing or attributing identities or ideas, they can then bring into existence a certain kind of subjectivity or a certain kind of experience of life. And Amber Heard is a primary example of this interpolation process that through radical feminism and Me Too, and obviously Time's Up, although they were more of just a bunch of money laundering scam artists, the identity that we understand as Amber Heard was a creation of these processes. It was an interpolated victim identity, and we see it across the board of womanhood, which I find to be, if anything, the stronger sex identity or gender. I don't like using that term very often, but the stronger sex identity, womanhood. I mean, hierarchically, nature itself has always put women first, females first, always, always. And the interpolation of this victim identity, of womanhood as a victim, is primarily a product of this this toxic feminist ideology that's infected our institutions. Frankly, Jordan Peterson, he's the one that nailed it. That these academic institutions have been so deeply infected by these far left radical feminists that it's changing the landscape of our society, to the point where we've gotten to Mr. Depp and Marilyn Manson is involved in this as well. Evan Rachel Wood is another example of an interpolated victim identity designed for profit, for the purposes of profit. And as you can see quite clearly, these powerful corporate actors are persecuting innocent men for profit. And Michele Dauber was involved in this entire process. It's quite clear, if you break it down the way that I have here, that Michele Dauber, by way of her involvement through Stanford and the CIA, has been involved in this process of creating victimhood for the purposes of making a great deal of money for some billionaires. And while I would argue that Amber Heard might not be fully conscious of her participation in this, meaning that I think there is a part of her that was a victim, that she was a target as well. I look at Michele Dauber, her involvement with the intelligence community, and how the intelligence community and the U.S. state, the state, was able to profit off of these victim identities, and also use it as a cover for other operations, whether it's weapons dealing, whether it's human trafficking, or what have you. This entire Me Too victim identity facade has been a way of keeping the public's attention away from the problems that are actually going on. If we're focused on, oh, well, these women are being abused by these Hollywood producers and so on and so forth, I'm not going to deny that. I mean, Harvey Weinstein is clearly a shitty person. And one of his best buddies, Ryan Kavanaugh, who's also, I'm more than certain, involved in all of this, is just another example. But we'll get into Ryan another time. I want to keep focused on Michele and our, as a community, our obligation to push back. So if we can clearly identify that Michele Dauber is, and obviously all of this is arguable. I have the receipts. I'm providing the receipts and the descriptions for you guys to look through. I mean, my frank hypothesis, and I think it's well supported, is that Michele Dauber was an intelligence handler that was responsible for ensuring that these victims that were brought forward, which are essentially also intelligence assets, like Evan Rachel Wood and Amber Heard, that these intelligence assets carried out their jobs as they were supposed to. And as you can see by her latest posts and the way that she's handling the Depp Heard verdict, Michele Dauber is scrambling to try to sort out how she's going to move forward. But I mean, she's she's definitely very well protected, whether it's by Stanford or by the CIA. They're not going to just let her go down. But I guarantee, just like Amber, she's probably, if we keep putting pressure on her, she's probably going to make some kind of fucked up mistake that we can call her out on, and finish our job here, which is to get rid of this toxic feminist anti-male discourse that's been infecting our universities, infecting the graduates from those universities, and quite frankly, infecting the world. A little post-production edit here, guys. Again, I'm new to this. You might be asking why this is all important and why I'm tying Michele Dauber into all of this and addressing or examining Michele Dauber. Is primarily, if you remember, Michele Dauber is the professor who had Brock Turner taken down for an alleged sexual assault. She went about attacking Judge Persky. It's a long history you'd want to look into, but the primary thing I want to point out is how Michele Dauber, along with Stanford University and a number of their publications, online publications, internal publications, and what have you, were involved in what may well be another false allegation hoax with a young man named Brock Turner. You might want to look into that on your own, do a little more research into that on your own time. I just really wanted to address how Michele Dauber is tied into this complex network of actors that are behind this false allegation hoax that was leveled against our beloved Johnny Depp. So that's my breakdown of an examination, and I say examination because women carry eggs. See? See what I did there? Of Michele Dauber. I'll be doing more of these videos. This is my first one. I hope you all enjoyed it. I need to credit the music provider who is listed below. I've applied for and will be becoming an ambassador for Stonesmith, which are a company that sells various different THC products. One of which I use regularly. It's their Stonesmith Slash. It's a dab pen. I use it all the time. So please like and subscribe. Come back for more content. I'll be doing my best to put more content together for you as often as possible. I hope you enjoyed this breakdown. Please leave a comment, like, subscribe. All right, Johnny Depp fan. Peace.